occurring April 18th through the 25th this year in New Orleans. So we hope to see a lot of you in attendance as we deep dive into the topics that we're going to be talking about today. So today we have Joe Moles from Red Canary. Joe is an IR and digital forensics specialist. He has more than a decade of experience running security operations and e-discovery. He's the director of detection operations at Red Canary. He leads a team of security analysts to help organizations defend their endpoints against threats. Prior to joining Red Canary, Joe built and led security operations, incident response, and e-discovery programs for Fortune 500 companies like OfficeMax and Motorola. Also presenting today, myself, Rick McElroy, security strategist for Carbon Black, 19-year security veteran, spent some time over in the DoD space, but really specialize in building rapid security operations programs and going from a zero maturity to a high level of maturity as fast as possible. Next. Awesome. So what are we going to talk about today? So we're going to ask the question what threat hunting is. We're going to talk about automating threat hunting, and we're going to talk about how automation of the hunt is not what most people think it is, and then how to build this practice into your security operations. Next. So why do we threat hunt? Well, we threat hunt because adversaries have changed, right? We have nation-state actors that are out there. Their tools are now being made public and in the hands of everyday cyber criminals. Right? We have the cyber criminal teams, we have hacktivists, insiders, and then finally, you know, I think an often ignored group, which are script kiddies, right? So people who pull tools off GitHub, publicly available things, point them at your systems, and attempt to do harm. So what is threat hunting? Threat hunting is the practice of actively looking for anomalous activity that has not been identified by your existing tool sets by searching through various sources of data. Threat hunting is the process of actively searching within an environment for evidence of previously undetected attackers. So I think the biggest point I would make here is that threat hunting is a proactive practice that involves humans and technology to seek out bad in your environment. What should the goals of threat hunting be? Well, the first goal should be to identify solid evidence indicating the presence or residual activities of attackers within a network or computing environment. You want to use threat hunting to assess your existing security and network security tools and identify gaps within process, people, technology, and education. And you want to improve your prevention and detection as a result. Threat hunting should, as you're out there threat hunting, it should identify gaps in your program that you're then able to quickly close. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Joe for the next couple of slides.
Yeah, so like Rick mentioned, you know, threat hunting really, a lot of it comes down to it's a continuous ongoing process. It's a continuous improvement effort. So you're looking for a bad thing, you're finding a bad thing, and you're figuring out how to find it faster. And you keep doing that over and over, and you're working on, we're talking about using that activity of actually delving into your information to look for those bad things, however you've heard about them, however you thought about them, you know, finding those things in your environment, taking action on them, and then figuring out within your tool set, within your security program, how do we do that faster next time? How do we continually improve based on the things that we found this time? How do we find it faster next time? How do we get that in front of my analyst? How do I get that in front of my security team? How do I even automate that so that, you know, my people can find the more advanced things next time? So, you know, it's how do we get there? You know, starting at kind of the least effective way, it's taking an ad hoc process, going as a one-off, digging in, looking for things that you found in a new report, things that you say, hey, I wonder what this looks like, or hey, some activity I just happened to notice that smells a little funny. I've got a hunch. You know, just kind of poking at it when you got free time. You know, then working all the way up to full automation, letting the tools do the work for you, and not thinking for you, but, you know, getting that information in front of you so you can take action on that and getting ahead. Working towards the easy things, the things that you know about you should let your tools find those for you, so then you can continue to dig in and find the things that your tools don't know about. And this is kind of a, uniting technology and people. I mean, people have, there's a power in people and there's a power in tools, and we want to bring those two ideas together, augmenting that human capacity to identify things, to work through complex problems, to do that analysis, but allowing the machine, the technology, whatever that is, to augment that ability and really bring the strengths of both of those together into one unified effort. So I'm going to pass it back to Rick here, and we're going to kind of just talk through some layered approach to threat hunting.
Yeah, at Carbon Black, our philosophy is really this. You build on top of the pieces that you have in your program, right? And for us, everything starts with visibility. If you're not collecting the right data from the right assets, there's simply no way to start enabling things like alert triage and threat hunting. So we're going to break these kind of layers down and talk about the impacts to threat hunting and how you get there, right? So the first one we're going to talk about is visibility. Right, so you got to collect the right things to analyze the right data. If you're not, I would say step one is drive the visibility, right? So if that's on the network, drive the visibility on the network. If it's on the endpoint, awesome. Collect the right security data so you can start to analyze that. And here's why, right? Take a look at the picture. Can anybody tell me who caused that accident based on the picture? I would say no, right? If you're not collecting that data and understanding the traffic patterns, you're simply not going to be able to stop things like this from occurring. However, when you start to drive the visibility in your environment, what you see is some normalization, right? You see patterns of things that occur, and I think it's much easier to detect, say, someone driving across the track in a NASCAR model than it would be in the previous picture. So for us, again, it does become about the visibility because it's the foundational layer that everything on top of it is built on. All right, we're going to talk about how that is associated with the attack kill chain and specific to things like IOCs, patterns of detection, that type of stuff. And with that, I'll hand it back to Joe.
Yeah, so good starting point. So getting that visibility in your environment, looking through your data sources, some of the first, low-hanging fruit attack ideas that you can kind of attack is just basic indicators. You have threat intel feeds. You have things that other tools have that you already have automated that I've identified for you. So looking at those things, feeding those into your system, raising those up, and then also looking at the behaviors of those items that you've previously identified. Again, we're talking leveraging technology that's already potentially in your stack and in getting that information in front of your humans and your team and letting them start identifying what they got out of that information. So again, looking at basic indicators, indicators, they're usually pretty easy to run through your environment, and then looking at those patterns of behavior. You get things that you've already found, or things, everybody gets the reports and the blog posts and everything, and looking through that information, not only taking those hash values, those IOCs, those IPs, all that kind of information that's there and it's got value, but also read through that report. What does this look like within my tool set? What does this look like as a behavior within my environment? One of the great ways I think, and I refer to this and I've referred to this in other talks, is the MITRE's attack matrix. I think this is a great framework for understanding those behaviors of, hey, attacker got in my environment, what are they going to do? Other good frameworks, everybody knows the kill chain model. Look through these, start laying this next to your tool set, next to your team, and say, okay, let's step through this in the environment. Let's look for these kind of activities. What does this look like in my environment? What does this look like in my tool set? And work through that systematically. Also, you can use that as you're going through and look at it as a gap analysis to identify within your within your environment. And just kind of switching gears a little bit, got a question that came in. The question is, do you have some good resources for determining what kind of data from an endpoint is most relevant from hunting? Where can we get the most bang for the buck in terms of visibility? So from a visibility endpoint, visibility aspect, I'm a big fan of the endpoint. That's the data that I work with. I imagine Rick, you probably agree with me, but we both work for companies that focus on the endpoint. Within that endpoint data, there's a lot of different places that you can kind of jump off from. The direction I tell my team when we're doing development on trying to come up with new behaviors, looking at a new environment, is let's take something that we already know about and pick the smallest unique behavior that we can find, and then look for that behavior within an environment. And then we start stacking up those different behaviors that we see. So hey, maybe it's an instance of PowerShell running a certain command line flag. Okay, let's see everywhere that we've got that going on. And then when we find, some of it's going to be good, some of it's going to be bad, but the ones that are bad, let's see what other behaviors then followed on before that and after that, and add that to our stack or our list of behaviors that we're looking for. Or again, I point back to the attack matrix. If you go through their webpage, there's a lot of really good information of, hey, use some basic attack behaviors at these different stages of a compromise. Look at those within that endpoint data, and then use that as a pivot point.
Yeah, Joe, that's a great point. I mean, I was going to bring that up, right, and say, yes, you can use attack frameworks to reverse all of the visibility that you would need, right, to actually detect those types of attacks. I'm a little jaded. I work for Carbon Black, and that's what we do, right? We're big on visibility. So yeah, you want to look at cross processes, right? So when a process kicks off another function or process, that's an interesting security metadata that you want to collect. DLL changes, those are interesting from a security behavioral perspective. Registry changes, what user ran what process at what time. Those are all things that you absolutely need to collect to get that definitive answer, right? Because I know for me, and part of the reason that I came over to Carbon Black is I had these unanswerable questions on my endpoints for years, right? And I kicked off internal projects. We wrote a bunch of code. We bought a bunch of tools, and still couldn't answer the fundamental question of like what actually occurred on that endpoint. So could we drive to 90% accuracy? Yeah, but 90% in our world isn't good enough. I need that last 10, right? So I think looking at the fundamentals of what you actually need to record so you can do detections along the kill chain or the attack framework is where you want to be.
Yeah, and here just there's another slide that talks just kind of reiterates a lot of these data points. Looking at these, so you're looking at some high-level behaviors. What does that look like? And again, think about it within the tool sets that you have. Do you have a Carbon Black, or do you have another endpoint tool that can provide you that visibility? Look for these behaviors within those environments, and start working down through those, figuring out what that looks like, what appears to be normal and what's not. Some of these are very when you dig into endpoint data, some of these types of behaviors, looking at it from that telemetry standpoint, get to be super noisy. And then one of the questions that came up from the audience is, how much time do you have to focus on indicator-based detection compared to behavioral-based? It seems to be the industry is split on the efficiency of threat intel feeds. So for my team, we use threat intel feeds. Most of our detection is focused on behavioral information, but threat intel feeds there's a lot of value there still for that type of quick win detection and quick win validation. Hey, is this? I can quickly check within a tool. I can say, hey, let's see, have I seen this MD5 anywhere in my environment? No. Okay, good. But I can also easily feed that in. It's a quick win from an automation standpoint. I can say, here's this list of MD5s, or here's this list of domains. I can quickly add that in, either from a prevention standpoint. So maybe it's a bunch of known bad IPs. push that out to my network team, put that in my proxy, put that in my firewalls, just shut that down right away. From a tool like Carbon Black, I can take those MD5s, I can do a quick, create a quick watch list, I can do a quick query and identify those information and do some quick wins. If I do find that information, I can take quick action and, one, stop that right away, but then two, I can look at that behavior around that and then learn from that and use that to drive more in-depth detection going forward.
Yeah, and I think just secondarily to that, a couple of things I kind of thought of as Joe was running through, right? So the first thing I'll say is bring in your pen test teams and pen tests for your gaps, right? So if you specifically want to be able to detect, say, a PowerShell type-based attack, once the attackers are in your environment, scope that for your red teams, right? And if the red team can't do it, go find one that can. That should reveal your detection gaps on the back end, which should give you a short list of projects to go run through, whether that's buying a piece of technology like Carbon Black to close a visibility gap, or doing that through some other mechanism. I think is huge. And then I think the last thing I'll say about IOCs versus behaviorals, it's a maturity thing, right? So I think as an industry, we weren't doing anything about indicators of compromise. Now we've enabled sort of these quick, easy wins, as Joe said, right? So I got a list of bad IP addresses. Let me go in and block those real quick. But we all know that data is transitory and very easy to change for the attackers, right? And we're going to talk about this a little bit towards the end of the slide, changing the cyber economics behind it, right? So actually making the attacker's job harder by improving the barriers to entering into your environment so that eventually they move on, or the attacks that they're hitting you with don't have an ROI, right? Which means they're going to switch what they're doing. So as an example, if we prevented ransomware 100% across the board, there would simply be no people participating in the cyber economy of ransoming systems because there's no payoff for them, right? So yeah, so I think for us, it really is, right? And IOCs do lead to patterns of attack, prevention, detection, but really what all of that stuff does is allow for faster triage, right? So being able to actually drive to the root cause as fast as possible and say, what happened? Did the user click on a malicious link? Were they phished? Did it come through via email? Rapidly being able to collect that data, analyze it, and then say, this is what occurred, which should drive remediation efforts. Right? That should allow you to look at where your prevention dollars are being spent today. And maybe in some cases, it's being spent incorrectly. So you have upstream filtering that should take care of this stuff, some of the phishing attacks, some of the spam attacks, things like that. But maybe they're not as effective as they could be. When you have that correct endpoint visibility and you actually see what all that filtering is either doing for you or not, should be very easy to then justify either an increase in your prevention spend or to look at the prevention tools that you have in place and pivot those to different technologies that may have more efficacy. And here's why. It really comes down to this. We can't know what's bad ahead of time, right? So next, Joe, if you wouldn't mind. Awesome. So we can't know what's bad ahead of time, right? I mean, we're always chasing the tail of the attackers. Things we know, attackers are innovating wildly. They're moving as fast as they possibly can. And oh, by the way, now we have large intelligence agencies that have produced lots of really good code and lots of fun stuff that's now in the open market, right? So over 2017 and 2018, my personal prediction is most attacks become advanced attacks. We talked about advanced persistent threats years ago and sort of started ringing that alarm bell. Now what we're seeing is that actually come to fruition where you see standard pieces of malware using evasion techniques on a regular basis to avoid your other technology, right? So prevention is a bit of chasing the tail. Detection and response really becomes about rapidly seeing the unknowns and that bottom of the iceberg, being able to put that picture together and then actually drive up your program and mature your controls. Next.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, it becomes very key. We talked about collecting the right data for visibility, and why is that? Well, look, the teams out there are struggling, and I've met with probably, over the last 2 years, I've probably met with 500 plus organizations. At no point in time has any one of those organizations said, I have enough people and I have enough time to do my job, right? So being able to quickly respond and detect these things and have a short list of alerts when the analysts and the folks in the SOC come in to do their job all saves them time. And we'll talk about that time equation again when we get into automating this stuff. But essentially, you need to be able to quickly root cause it, right? So in this particular instance, you know, when Windows Explorer launches Chrome, Chrome then launches Java. That's fairly standard. You're going to see that, you know, hundreds of thousands of times on endpoints, and it's meaningless from a security perspective, right? A user's running Java, no big deal. But then Java does something funky, right? And it kicks off cmd.exe, which then starts to execute some malware. Now you see the attacker, you know, doing data exfiltration and/or lateral movement. They gain persistence in your environment. Now they've got credentials, and they're probably doing some other stuff, right? So being able to put that whole entire chain of events together and rapidly triage and rapidly remediate is really the key to success right now. Next. You want to take this one, Joe?
Yeah. So, you know, just kind of building off of that. So, say we've identified, you know, we have that visibility. We've identified the threat. You know, part of this continued process is then what do we do after we found it? You know, and the first couple of those steps is retrospection and hardening. So, looking back at what happened and why it happened, and then looking forward at how do we prevent, how do we reduce that, you know, that attack footprint in the future. So, you know, looking, you know, part of that retrospection is, okay, again, thinking about how do I find this faster? You know, did we have visibility? Where is that? Where else did I see this? You know, take that time. You know, you find one bad thing, look for those you know, quickly go back, look for those behaviors, make sure it wasn't anywhere else in your environment, and then also push forward. And okay, what do I need to change in my environment to prevent that? Is it a user rights issue? Is it a patching issue? Is it a, you know, hardening on a server issue? Where was the gap in my security controls that I can use to stop or at least reduce the risk around that specific pattern of attack that I've now found?
Yeah, and I think the other point I would make on that is as you're locking down your environment, right, as you're hardening your environment, it's going to give you less places to hunt, right? So if you look at technologies like whitelisting, those are going to call a lot of noise in your environment, which means that, again, that precious time that we talked about out of the security defenders is better spent on actual alerts, on actual things they need to go do to stop bad, right? Yeah, so all of those layers, right, as we build through the visibility, as we look at adding IOCs, because those are quick wins, right? Joe, I think, did a good job talking about that. As we're able to quickly triage and remediate these issues, hey, we've got retrospection answering the question, did this ever happen in my environment? How prevalent is it? We move into hardening, right? Because now we've got better visibility to determine where we should spend our preventative controls. Okay, awesome. So we've done a lot of manual effort. We've created a bunch of process that didn't exist before because we weren't threat hunting. Now I want to make it efficient, right? Now I want to be able to do this at scale. Now I want to be able to do it and be independent of, say, my awesome threat hunt team that goes and works for Red Canary, right? You know, so you want to make your strategy, and you really want to think about this when it comes to threat hunting, right? It's got to be a process that exists over the life cycle of your program, right? So building it as a point in time, dependent on individuals, I would say is bad. You want processes and technology that are going to exist outside of the individuals that are running them, because as we all know, resources leave all the time, especially good senior resources, right? So a couple of things I'll say about automation. If you could go to the next one, Joe. So the first thing I'll say is that the current state of cybercrime shows an extremely profitable market. According to a 2014 report by RAND, the cyber black market was found to be more profitable than the illegal drug trade. In 2011, the UN commissioned an illicit funds report, which found that the largest income from transnational organized crime came from illicit drugs, accounting for $2.1 trillion. right? So now what we're saying is fast forward to 2014, it's actually more profitable than illicit drugs, right? So using that to estimate the size of the black market, if you took one illicit drug, such as cocaine, that's estimated to be an $85 billion industry. Google last year brought in about $90 billion in revenue, right? So cybercrime as a whole is exceeding the profit and profitability of Google as an entity. And oh, by the way, it's estimated 1.7 million people are actually employed in this, which would make cybercrime one of the largest corporations if it was held as an entity on the earth. So automation becomes super important, right? It becomes important so that we can change these economics. I talked a little bit about that earlier. But it also becomes important to your team because it scales. And as we know, senior engineers and analysts hate to do manual activities, right? We're professionally lazy, and I'm okay with that. I don't think that's saying that is bad, right? So look for opportunities to automate manual processes. Kind of my next, actually that's a good slide. So kind of my take with my team has always been this: if you do the manual activity 5 times and the results come out exactly the same, put it on the short list to automate, write some Python code there. Or hopefully your manufacturers that are out there are allowing you to do this type of automation. Next. And what that's really going to do is you got to prove it out manually, right? Because if you don't, you're going to run into issues as you scale your program, right? So now we're going to talk a little bit about, we talked about automation. Now we're going to talk about orchestration amongst your products, right? So optimal state. An alert is generated, say it comes from a threat intelligence feed in this case. You're going to send that over to some type of system to cross-check for contents. Typically we call these SIMs, but it could be custom written stuff that you have in your environment. It's going to pull things like the device history, the user profile and behavior. Now you have an enriched alert, and oh, by the way, humans didn't have to touch any of this. So when we talk about uniting man and machine, the machine should really be making the human's job more efficient, right? So now that we've got a cross-checked alert for context, we pulled all this information that would have normally been pulled manually, right? So maybe the engineer is calling someone on the desktop team to go actually pull that laptop so that they can get the data off of it, right? All super manual, waste of time, in my opinion. Those should be automated because really what it's about is getting to remediation steps, right? So identifying the issue, detecting the issue, stopping the bleeding through isolation and whatever techniques that your team uses. Now you're able to get into killing processes on the endpoint, resetting those credentials, blocking the IP addresses, right, that were involved with, command and control channels. Those are all things that you should be able to do in as close to real time as possible. So as you're thinking through your strategy for threat hunting, you definitely want to make orchestration and automation a part of it because, again, that's how you're going to get to scale. And overall, that's how we're going to change the cyber economics behind what the criminals are doing.
And a couple of questions that came in from the audience here. First one here, do we have any resources that we would recommend to support automation, or are there any resources that can teach me best practices? And then I'll just throw out the other one, and we can maybe answer these both in the same response. Do you need SEM to support automation and orchestration? And are there ways to set those actions without a SEM?
I'll take the second one first. Joe, you want to take the first one?
Yeah. So, so just jumping, recommended for support of automation. Kind of the first answer is SEM is a great tool for automation. The other thing is looking at certain things that anything that you can script. So one of the things I tell people, why I like having humans in the mix is that if I can consistently show that same behavior, that same action, then I can script it. So some of the actions that we take, is some of that low-hanging things. Is this consistently showing this behavior as bad? Okay, then I just block that behavior from happening in my environment. That's an easy automation. Can I, use a whitelisting tool or a blacklisting tool to say, hey, this software publisher, I don't want that in my environment. Some of those kind of controls, those are the quick and easy automations. So other things, then it gets into a maturity thing. Can I integrate this into my SIM? Is there, do I have orchestration tools or control tools or other solutions within my environment? How is my IT controls built around? Can I leverage some of that type of things? Do I have a good endpoint management tool outside from my detection capabilities that I can use to set up some basic things to start uninstalling, removing, preventing those type of things, and working with my IT organizations as part of that process and automate that process in. Maybe it's other things that I've used is building into my alert sources. If there's, again, low things or things that I know I can take an immediate response, can I build that into my help desk solution? So through whatever alerting source or tool I'm using, can I send a quick email over, just I know this behavior is bad, I know this is exactly what it is, here's the steps. I just want to send an email right to my help desk that says, hey, this person's computer has got this infection, we need to just pull them offline and go clean them up right away, and here's the steps. Those are some quick and easy wins to catch that. Some of the lower hanging things, but you can get a lot faster response on that.
Yeah, those are good points, Joe. I would absolutely bring up things like most of the industry uses MSSPs, or in the case of Red Canary, right, you have a managed endpoint detection and threat organization that looks at logs, and at some point they're going to escalate alerts to you, right? So even if you took a simple process like an alert's escalated, I should know whether that needs follow-up or if it needs to be closed immediately. And looking at your ticketing, your ITIL-based ticketing systems, those should have those capabilities built in. To answer the question about SIM, if I was looking at buying a SIM today, it would absolutely be a weighted criteria for me that there is some sort of orchestration that can occur in that. And I think you'll see the major vendors moving towards that. A number of orchestration automation vendors have appeared in the space, right, to sort of solve this problem of not enough tier 1 resources, can't get them in a SOC fast enough, can't train them fast enough to actually do work. I won't plug any particular ones, but I think you could do a Google search and find those. The other thing I'll say is you should have talent on your team for scripting, right? So whether that's Python, whether that's Bash, whether it's PowerShell, I think as I was looking to hire new folks to come into my program and mature my threat hunt, those are absolute skills that I would require coming in the door. So I hope that answers those questions.
Yep. So a couple other questions here. Do you have any guidance on do you have any guidance on automated response actions when you don't have 100% certainty? In your opinion, should you limit automated response to threats that you're not 100% certain of?
Go ahead, Joe.
I was going to say my answer is it largely depends. That comes down to a risk discussion. And it depends on what your automated response is. Is it shutting down a process? Is it isolating a host? And what's the impact of a false positive in that effect? And so it's a balancing. That comes down to a discussion of risk. Which is the greater risk in that situation? Do you have other response processes that you can quickly respond without doing that automated to get that resolved right away? Or is there some intermediary? So hey, maybe I can isolate that host and kick a high ticket over to my help desk, have them engage with that user right away and assess that behavior and take action. Or is this a production server that's hosting my e-com environment, and if I shut anything down, I shut down business? In that case, I might be a little bit more leery of taking an automated response, but I'm also going to be a little bit more intent on getting on that box, digging in that information and validating that. So again, it's balancing that the risk on either side of that.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I absolutely agree. It's cultural. I think when you're starting your program, it would probably be a bad idea to react to all alerts and just start like isolating hosts and turning off services. But as you mature, right? You should be able to highlight some of these things and go, well, look, and I love Joe's point, right? So I have a server farm, and one of my e-commerce server farm gets owned. Shouldn't I be able to take an automated action on that particular thing if I have reasonable assurance that occurred and not take down my website, right? So through some of this process, you may actually highlight other areas that IT needs to improve, right? So having an actual farm, having load balancing that actually works so you can pull systems offline and maintain uptime. Availability is still part of the security CIA triad. And so I always looked at it that way as I was working with other leaders in IT and other leaders in the org. There were certain cases that, hey, we're going to isolate this host. Maybe it's an endpoint, maybe it's a desktop. And yes, we may impact one user, but here's our reasonable level of assurance. And then to Joe's point, I think you step into production systems that have a big impact to your financial bottom line. But in the end, if both teams are working together and the architects of those solutions are sitting down and actually looking at the overall impact, you should be able to build that resiliency in there to be able to do those things and still maintain availability.
So, the kind of moving on from the automation side, we get back into the actual, hunting. So the actual, now we've gone through, we've done some, behaviors, we triage, we've gone through, and then we get back to the top, which I really think is just, we're circling right back to where we started, is, engaging in this, taking this in a, as a real-time activity, as you mature, this becomes faster and faster, and this becomes very much a real-time activity. So, maybe I've got an alert, I've automated looking for certain PowerShell activities. All right, let's jump right in. As soon as we see that, we've already filtered out, the legitimate activity. We know, hey, somebody, administrators using certain PowerShell commands as part of our Exchange management and some of our server management and everything like that. We can then look, we filter that out of the view. We already know what that looks like, so we can quickly kind of shift gears and see what other activities is this doing. Digging into that, looking in around that activity, and finding that that root cause, because now we've part of this hunting activity is not only visibility by tools, but visibility by understanding your environment. So that's the other really great takeaway from going through, having your team go through this activity. Now I understand my environment, so I can continue to refine the knowledge I have of my environment and what's going on, and we can work down through, again, working down through this whole chain of activity and take action as we go along. As we mature this process, we can start, all those steps we've kind of talked about, we can start taking action around those in real time, working around those around those behaviors. And then, go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it really becomes about the tail end, right? So awesome. So we've been able to quickly triage. We drove to visibility. Now we can see the malicious activity. We can scope the attack. But how quickly can you get that information back into your program and make changes, right? So agile, secure security operations, right? So being able to say, hey, I don't have the logs I need to actually go hunt. Well, that should be on a project list somewhere, and it should be on a tactical project list, right? Okay, step one, get the logs, right? And we'll talk about this sort of at the close of the prezo, but it should really be about, you're not always going to find evil while you're out there, right? Sometimes you're going to identify gaps in your program, but that needs to be tracked, and someone has to manage it like a program, right? So you need to be able to come up with a strategic set of things that need to be done, right, as a result of information uncovered during hunting, and then you're probably going to have a whole list of tactical things like creating a process to actually go find evil on a Windows box.
And here we got a related question here. It's kind of somewhat tangential, but I think it's a good question. While CB is great in my view for cleaning up the environment, would it or threat hunting a threat hunting exercise identify, let's say, malicious items in backups or email archives? So in my view, yes, part of that hunt exercise is you're trying to find those behaviors. You know, you're identifying something bad going on, but then it's going back and looking at that. When did this happen? How did this happen? Identifying that. If I find something that, hey, this came in through email, yeah, that's probably one of my action items. Just go back and look through those files, or look through related emails, look through related items in the environment to identify and clean those up. I've worked in plenty of environments where everybody has a PST. We've got huge email archives and everything. So we should have some way that we're going through and identifying through, maybe it's other logs, maybe it's, going through, working with the Exchange admin, working with whatever, or the backup admin if we found these files on a server or something else, making sure that part of our remediation process and part of our root cause analysis is working with those other teams. I think part of a great security program and a great threat hunting program and a great IR program is engagement outside of the security team. Do we have buy-in from the help desk? Do we have buy-in from the business? Do we have buy-in from other IT organizations to do follow-up, to assess, to triage, to do all those steps along this process? We have to, like Rick said, it's part of a program. It should be a company-wide program. Security is the one driving it and maybe doing a lot of the boots on the ground effort, but if we're identifying gaps or areas and things that we need to be able to do cleanup, to do prevention, to do whatever that, we need to make sure that all the teams within the organization have bought into that and can leverage that information that we've gained through that visibility, through that hunting action.
Yeah, and I think, what I would say to that is if you've seen any of my kind of in-person talks on creating a culture of threat hunting, right? One of the things I talk about is enlisting an army, right? So looking at those folks like email admins, why not teach them how to go hunt in their own environment so that now lives outside of security? It's a good part of system administration and something they should be doing anyway. But the chances are they're probably undereducated and undertrained. And chances are, given how many people are hosting email, they probably got some cycles to do it, right? And again, I wouldn't say that's going to happen day one, but as part of your overall strategy, you should look for these areas where you're able to impart that education and knowledge, and then give them tools to go do that, or give them requirements for tools, right, as they're looking at increasing email security. Maybe that budget doesn't live with you, which is often the case. It lives over in IT. Cool. You have a relationship where you can go to them with this rated criteria and say, from a security perspective, here's things we'd like to see you guys do, or activities and processes that should exist around this particular system.
Yep. And here I got one more question for us, Rick, and I think this leads into our next slide really well. For someone just getting started with threat hunting, what are some of the basic behaviors and things we should be looking for? I think that leads into I think we can tail that right into your next point here, Rick.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the first thing you want to do is sit down and come up with a plan, right? And yeah, that sounds a little cheesy, but I do believe in that. I think if you just run off and start doing stuff, you're probably not going to have the impact that you want and the time. You could probably save yourself some time through better planning, right? So I think the first thing is to make a conscious effort that this is an activity you need to do because detective controls are currently failing, right? We talked about the innovation going on in the cyber criminal and nation states, right? They're evading all of this stuff, right? So they're evading your preventative controls. So you should absolutely be doing this. So you come up with a plan, right? 30 to 90 days. You're going to start doing things like ad hoc hunting. Now, what do I mean by that? Joe did a good job earlier about talking about the beginning of the threat hunting chain, right? So I have a hunch. I have a hunch that my CTO and CEO just got back from China, and I have a hunch that there's malware on their systems. So I'm going to start with a very limited subset of data and start looking at processes to go find that, right? So I'm going to choose not to eat the entire pie. I'm going to eat it one spoonful at a time, right? So I think we all know or should know where our high-risk users are. I think we should also know where our control gaps are, right? It's a good program manager. You should know where your gaps are. So those are the areas that you probably want to start hunting first. If you've got good prevention in areas and over time you haven't seen things like compromises or breaches, cool, you can probably ignore those to start and go looking in these other areas. There's some very helpful tools out there like threathunting.net. The SANS Threat Hunting and Incident Response Summit has a wealth of education that comes out around how to actually find evil on certain systems, like, hey, behaviors on Linux are going to look like this. Here's how I would go detect that, right? You're going to create things like a rapid feedback loop. You're going to look at the gaps, like, hey, I don't have visibility in logs. I should probably talk to my boss about that, or get funding, or start the discussion of creating this culture. The rapid feedback loop we talked about becoming highly important so that you can actually drive change faster in your programs. So now you've been doing some hunting. You've got gaps identified. Hopefully you're starting to work on closing those gaps. And then really, 3 months in, you can start to automate. So I went and looked for evil on 2 laptops in my environment 6 times, and the results came out the same, and the process that I used was the same. Hugely important that you're following the same exact process to start to automate. Cool. Now I'm going to start to automate some of that stuff through scripting so I can go threat hunt elsewhere. I'm going to start identifying my tool set to support and streamline that. 120 days to a year. Again, this is going to depend on your environment. I've seen environments take 3 years to actually make a purchase, so I hope folks in our audience don't have that large of a barrier to actually getting some new tools in. But I'm going to purchase and implement tooling. I'm going to baseline. I'm going to start training. I'm going to do all that good stuff with my staff. Now I get into year 2 and 3, and it's continual process improvement, right? So being able to say, the direct impact of me having a threat hunting process, a threat hunting team, and threat hunting tools has led to an increase in prevention, automation, orchestration, more sophisticated hunting. This is where the program leaders are going to start to track metrics like number of pieces of evil found, right? Whatever you want to call that metrics, mean time to detect, mean time to remediate are going to be key there. And it really just becomes at that point, much like any other part of your security program, it's the constant feedback loop, constant care and feeding, and then hopefully enabling your team by getting them some education dollars and sending them to things like the SANS Threat Hunting Summit, which is just invaluable, right? There's tons of threat hunting talks that go down at Black Hat and DEF CON. And, so yes, you will have to make an investment in education for your people, but that's not to say that there's not a lot of free education out there.
So a couple of questions here, Rick, I'm going to throw out here. So one of the first ones, what's the best practice for around ranking the stream of events that are made visible? As typical, one gets overwhelmed with the volume of signal to noise. So
yes. Go ahead.
You want to take that one? Or?
No, you can start, and then I'll jump in for sure.
Okay. So I'd say one of the things that we do internally, I've done it with other teams, is and I think Rick mentioned this too, is start small. You're not gonna find everything in the environment. It's the same thing. You don't stand up a solution and say, give me turn on all the things and hope to be able to consume that. Figure out in some fashion what's important. Where do you have, like Rick mentioned, where do you have known gaps? Okay, why don't you start there? Let's get visibility around those known gaps and start working through it. The other thing is part of a maturity program, if you have, as you're automating these things, as you're bringing in tools, figure out a way to track metrics on that. Metrics is huge. Measure yourself. How long, what's my false positive rate from this, signature, from this behavior, from this tool? Figure out where, and use those numbers to drive, one, your confidence in a given tool or detection or behavior or whatever, and then two, where you need opportunity, where there's opportunity for tuning. Hey, this one, this over here is, consistently hits almost 100% of the time. I know when this fires, it's bad. Cool, automate that. Now you have confidence in that. Then, let's work down from there and, okay, hey, this over here is causing me, it's just constantly noise, 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 noise. Figure out a way to figure out what is that noise. Is that something that you can tune in? Is that something that's known within your environment? Okay, then you need to make adjustments for that. And that should be part of the output of this exercise is, pick a piece, work it down as far as you can, and then identify both the bad things, but also the opportunities for noise reduction.
Yeah, and I think secondarily to that too, hopefully you're doing asset management, right? So hopefully you know where the keys to the kingdoms are, and you're able to identify those. Now I completely understand, because it's often been the case in my programs when I'm starting, that other areas of the org maybe mature slower than the security team, right? So you come in to start a program on day zero. You've got a number of assets, you've got a number of people, you've got a number of controls, maybe, hopefully. And one of them should just be good asset management, right? So in a lot of cases, you should be able to integrate with your asset management system to understand which systems have more important than the others, which should drive your alerting, and at least what you're triaging. Now, yes, I completely understand that this will be manual on the part of the security team until IT matures their asset management. But the other thing I would say to that is coupling it with the behaviors that occur, right? So just because I got an alert on, well, let's use the scenario of my CEO's laptop. So my CEO gets an alert from a traditional AV tool, and it says, hey, this was partially quarantined, right? So, oh, something's on there. It should really be about the behavior of what it's doing, right? Because just because it's the CEO's laptop, it may be a little more important, but maybe he doesn't have access to all of the things that, say, your engineering and development team would, like source code. So the behaviors of what the attackers are doing becomes super critical in actually being able to triage the stuff and say, this alert is more important than this alert, and here's why. It's based on the behavior, right? So mapping back to kind of the kill chain, the earliest you can stop them in the kill chain, awesome. If you can stop them during recon, cool. It's going to make their job harder and probably end the rest of the attack chain. But I think those two factors for me, kind of like if I had to start at day zero, would be like, what is the asset, what's on it, and what is the behavior that the attacker is taking on that box? And your tools, like when you look at EDR tools, they should do that for you, right? So they should be able to, based on these other factors, actually triage your alerts based on that.
So, all right, a couple more questions here. And I think these two, cluster real nice. One, can threat hunting be done without a dedicated visibility tool, either endpoint or network? And then are there any open source tools that you would recommend?
So I will start by saying this. This function typically doesn't exist in most security programs, right? So you have to start somewhere. So while I will always stand on the best possible stance is to collect all of the right metadata at the endpoints, you're probably not going to be in that state, right? I wish everybody would buy, Karm block response, throw it out there, and get the visibility. But we all know budgets are concerns. Maybe you spent some money on firewalls this year and you just don't have it, so you got to start somewhere. So yeah, I would say you have log sources today. You have DNS logs. You have DHCP logs. You have Active Directory logs. You should be logging things from your network, like routers and switches. Those are perfect areas to start threat hunting without having the complete tool set that I would argue you need to do it.
Yeah, I would agree with Rick there. One of my favorites, just from a tactical standpoint, one of my favorites is anybody running a Windows environment, turn on PowerShell logging. There's some great logging options that aren't turned on by default in your Windows environment that provide a lot of value and a lot of interesting information that you can start using to get some understanding of what's going on in your environment. You may have to kind of tune and tweak and which places you're turning on certain things, but maybe in your on your CEO's laptop and the keys to the kingdom server, you've got PowerShell logging, and then when you're seeing those PowerShell events happening within those Windows logs, okay, why is your CEO running PowerShell unless you're working for a tech company and he's writing his own code? Those are some highly suspect things. And looking for getting engagement. Work with your server teams and help them understand what's going on, and maybe maybe not finding bad things, maybe just finding inefficiencies, but again, engage with those other teams to use the tools that are already in the environment, built into the operating system, built into the network, to look for those things. DNS logs are a wealth of knowledge. Get into passive DNS information gathering and everything. That provides a lot of details and information that you can do kind of right out of the gate without a lot of financial investment.
Yeah, and you know, we didn't list them all, but I did want to point out threathunting.net again, because I love when the community gets together and we just start publishing, like, here's the actual steps to go find this malicious process on this particular system, which is cool. So if there's any threat hunters out there, I would encourage you guys to participate, because we all can't afford tools. And I know, especially after meeting with the number of companies that I have over the last 2 years, that's just the reality that we're in. So the term I like to use is being a baller on a budget and doing more with less. So yes, absolutely take advantage of scripts that are out there. Absolutely take advantage of whatever you can to drive the visibility. But I think what you'll find is there's a reason that Carbon Black made a product, and it was simply to answer those questions that I talked about earlier that I couldn't quite get 100% assurance on my endpoints. So I think we're almost out of time. I did want to thank everybody for joining us today. I also wanted to say hopefully we'll see you all in a couple of weeks at the Threat Hunting and IR Summit in New Orleans that SANS is hosting. Wealth of great information. If you're looking at building a threat hunting program, if you're looking for process, and frankly, if you're looking to interact with other folks doing the job of IR and threat hunting on a daily basis and get to share some of that information, I can't reiterate enough how great that event is. So thanks everybody for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. And just one other thing, for any questions we aren't able to answer, we'll look out for a follow-up email with some of those questions that we'll try and respond offline.